just made it!
Yeah, okay. I might as well just do it anyway. So we're here again. Same as usual, we're gonna be talking about some random things that are just randomly inserted into this little lore that I made for the island. I guess my long ambition is to at least diverse my content and move away from these wasteful vids and move on to more useful vids, for y'all to actually see and, like and whatnot. It's basically like the start of it, a Flochi's commentating arc or something that I made up. Yeah, it's unusual, but we'll get there eventually. So yeah, and enough said, let's get into this little video, shall we? Number 1. If you decide to take a look at a peek at the waste dump, then you would find a non-industrial built steam locomotive, but we all know the name, WIF, in whom, at least in my headcanon, is a Northeastern Railway X2 class. Before we knew him for this design today, he used to be a part of the 124 built Northeastern Railway bulky tank passenger locomotives, also known as the G6 class. They were built to handle the passenger services around the branch lines of the Northeastern Railway, and with WIF being numbered 957, he was rebuilt into a 224T steam locomotive. He would remain in this condition even under LNER ownership until being withdrawn in 1937, and where he would be sold to Sodor. During his time on Sodor, it would be used as the NWR's private engine to pull an inspection coach around the island until finally being withdrawn around the late 1940s. After being in storage for a long time, in the mid-1980s, he was overhauled and returned to service as an industrial locomotive, working along an industrial rubbish plant and given a nickname WIF. He is still operational around the industrial area of the waste dump as of today. Number 2. The Marin to Kelstorp line, otherwise known as the Main Line Loop, was opened in the late 1870s by the pre-grouping Northwestern Railway companies as they would connect from Marin of the Rosewood and Surrey Railway to Kelstorp Road around the Forsey areas on the Sodor and Mainland Railway. As stated earlier, the mainline loop starts at Marin before heading towards the junction along the loop line, then heads south towards another junction that leads into the goods line that was opened sometime prior to the mainline loop's grand opening of the late 1870s. There, a station known as Castleton Junction would be located. Then the loop line would continue on until reaching into its Killaban, where it would have a station, some sidings, and a small line that leads into an industrial plant. After that, the line would traverse on until reaching the station of Blackbrook Junction, in where the line splits into two, the line leading into Kirk Ronan and the other line that leads into its next station of Calbanoo. At Calbanoo, the station would have had a 3-platform setup as well as a dead-end siding for storing trucks. And then, after more than just half a mile, they would reach into a junction that leads into the Forsey areas of Kelstorp. As for the line towards Kirk Ronan, it would start at Killaban like I said earlier, for heading south towards Takanawa Junction with connections to the Isle of Muffle Mountains Railways. It would continue past Takanawa Junction for later reconnecting with the Kirk Ronan branch line at Rolf's Castle South. The mainline loop will go under several ownerships, but as of today, passengers and goods trains now operate along this line along the privatized Northwestern Railway. Number 3. Despite my headcanon with the red engine being a 440 steam locomotive, I wanted to actually incorporate this little known red engine into my own little AU, just so I don't need to have another engine push Henry out of the tunnel. And thus, the third red engine, at least in my AU, is a Glasgow and Southwestern Railway Class 403-260 steam locomotive. The locomotive was built in 1915 to handle goods trains around the Glasgow and South Western Railway, and by 1922, the locomotive was loaned to the North Western Railway on trial. While on trial, the goods locomotive handled quite well between Teignmouth and Vickerstown, and thus the locomotive was bought out by the North Western Railway, keeping its original number. Now under the NWR ownership, the locomotive was painted red in its mixed traffic livery, although it primarily be seen pulling goods trains between Teignmouth and Vickerstown, and by 1936, it was given the standard green livery by the NWR. As of today, the Austrian goods locomotive is still in operations with the North Western Railway, now in its Glasgow and South Western livery, and still pulling goods trains between Teignmouth and Vickerstown and back. Number 4. The Great Western Railway 5700XX is a fleet of 060 pannier tanks built by the Great Western Railway between 1929 and the early 1950s. They were primarily seen all across the entire network, ranging from shunting trains at the big station to even operating branch line services along the West Country and the southernmost points of Cornwall and the entirety of Wales. Almost the entirety of their class, with the likely exception of those being built in the 1950s, had become a part of British Railways on the Great Western Railway in 1948, and they continued into operations until the first one was withdrawn in 1956, and the last one was withdrawn in 1971. GWR 5700XX number 4646 was built sometime during the 1930s, and was used as a station pilot for London's Paddington for most of its life. His life on the Great Western Railway and later British Railways would remain uneventful. However, a slight numbering mistake had occurred when he was accidentally given the number 5741 instead of its original number, as it was given to another engine that worked in Wales. In 1955, British Rail had soon sold the now numbered 5741 to the North Western region of British Rail, in which it became Teignmouth's brand new station pilot. His original name was Montague, but after a shunting accident at Old Oak Common, which led him having his frames removed and started wobbling around when shunting, he was given a name Duck, and soon the name was stuck. After some time has passed, including a slight mishap with a barber shop, the 5700XX has finally received its own branch line alongside a call it 1400XX. And as of today, you can still see him chuffing up and down on his branch line with his 2 auto coaches, while also handling the shunting around Teignmouth from time to time. Number 5. The British Rail Class 52, also known as the Westerns, were a fleet of 74 built diesel hydraulic locomotives that were built by the Western region's very own Swindon workshops between 1961 and 1964. The hydraulics were primarily used on express passenger trains between London and Plymouth, Bristol, Swansea, and even the West Country like Birmingham's Snow Hill. But they were also used on goods trains, mail trains, as well as other duties that the Hymex can perform. Unfortunately, due to British Rail's rationalization plan, the hydraulics were primarily seen as non-standard, and all of the Westerns were not withdrawn until 1977, when the last of them operated around the Western region of British Railways. Around the time that the last of the Westerns were withdrawn, the Northwestern region had bought out 10 of the ex-Western region hydraulics, and they were soon placed into storage for some time before later being restored to operating condition around the early 1980s. And as of today, since 2006, these diesel hydraulics can still be seen operating around the island under private ownership of the Northwestern Railway. Number 6. The GWR 4800s, or the 1400s, were a fleet of 042T steam locomotives that were built by the Great Western Railway's very own Swindon Works between 1932 and 1936. These tank engines were primarily used around the Western Region branch lines of the Great Western Railway and later Western Region of British Railways, until being withdrawn between 1956 and 1965, with only 4 remaining in preservation since 2025. Around 1958, a withdrawn 1400XX, numbered 1436, otherwise known as Oliver, was bought out by a private owner and was sent to work around the Midland region of British Railways, operating auto trains between Morecambe and Lancaster. When British Rail announced the ban of steam on all regions around British Rail, Oliver, alongside an auto coach and a brake van named Toad, made their way to the island via hiding in an old branch line for later being caught by a passing diesel and was soon sent to a scrapyard before being rescued by a fellow Caledonian 652 class. He was taken to the workstation at Crowburn's Gate, and after some time being restored, the locomotive was placed in an operating condition by late 1967. He would operate on the Little Western branch line alongside Doug, although a few mishaps happened during this time along the Little Western branch line, but he continued to operate around that branch line ever since. Sometimes he can be seen outside of the branch line doing some odd jobs around the island, and even visiting heritage railways to see his brothers again. This brave little collet tank engine is still thriving around the island since then, and it still does to this day. Number 7. The Crockwell steam trams were a fleet of overall VBT, or vertical boilered steam trams, which originated in Belgium and were built by the John Crockwell and CIE Works in Serang, Belgium, which were well known for building locomotives for the Belgian state railways of the NMBS or SNCB. One of these vertical boilered steam trams would end up in the Netherlands, as a buyer would buy out 3 of the John Crockwell steam trams to work in their gas plant near Amsterdam in the Netherlands. These vertical boilered steam trams would remain in operations until being replaced by Dutch-built diesel shunters, and were soon displaced from their services around the gas plants, and later on were put up for sale. They would end up in private ownership until finally being bought out by a railroad company that would have their second lease on them, and that railway company was the Northwestern region of British Railways in the 1970s. They would leave their old home in the Netherlands and would end up at around Crowburn's Gate, where, years later, they would be restored into operating condition, and they were sent to Farquhar to start their work shunting trains around the yards and at the sidings of the station. On some occasions, they would be used around the Farquhar tramway on inspection duties, but as of today, they are still seen shunting around the yards at Farquhar. But sometimes they can do odd jobs around the branch line, but for a more shorter distance. Although they're not privately owned anymore, these Dutch-built Crockwell steam trams run still in operations around the island as of today, as of 2025. Number 8. The LSWR N15 classes, otherwise known as the Southern Railway King Arthur classes, were a fleet of 060 passenger engines that were built by the LSWR very own Eastleigh Works and the North British Locomotive Works between 1918 and 1927. They were used on express passenger trains between London and Exeter, and they would enter Southern Railway ownership in 1923 and later British Railways in the 1940s. Withdrawals with these classes began around 1955, with the last of them being withdrawn around 1962. Around July of 1961, a fellow King Arthur class that was withdrawn, numbered 30453, named King Arthur, was awaiting at the scrap heap around Eastleigh when it was suddenly bought up by its private owner and was soon shipped off to Sodor, where it would be restored to operating condition and would start operating road tours around the island and on the mainland until the private owner's unfortunate death around the late 1980s and early 1990s. Surprisingly for the locomotive, it was bought out by the Northwestern region of British Railways and was soon placed on passenger operations around the island and sometimes on the mainland on road tours. But, as of today, the locomotive itself is operating an express passenger service between Titmouth and Kirkronan via Caliban and Takanawa Junction. The locomotive is surprisingly still in service even after its major overhaul around 2016 and is expected to continue operating with the Northwestern Railway even as the decades go on. But alas, the now Sudrian-owned King Arthur is a part of the Northwestern family. Number 9. Around the 1920s, the Northwestern Railway wanted to experiment with a new type of coupling system, and so, in the late 1920s, they began installing these strange new things on the back of the tender engines and on the carriages. This was known as the Buckeye coupler. Soon, every tender engine on Sodor would receive the Buckeye coupling treatment on the back of their tenders, with the likely exception of the LMS stock, as the LMS never really adopted the Buckeye coupling system, unlike the LNER and the Southern Railway. As time went on, as years go by, the Northwestern Railway and later Northwestern Regional British Railways would continue to adopt the system even when the new British Railways Mark I was introduced into service in early 1951. After some time has passed, and the Northwestern region stopped using the Buckeye coupling system around the late 1960s, a new type of coupling system was introduced around the mainland in the 1970s, that being the automatic knuckle coupler, a successor to the Buckeye coupler. First being introduced on the slam door units of the 1970s, this coupling system is still in use on modern-day Britain, with the EMU train sets being fitted with one, as well as other rolling stock being fitted with one as well. As of today, the Northwestern Railway still uses the same old knuckle coupling system as they were used on rolling stock, engines, and even carriages that they own, which are still in use as of today. And finally, number 10. Around the late 1940s, the Southern Railway and later British Railways would develop a modern steam locomotive, otherwise known as the bullied leader class. Unfortunately, only one was built, and 4 of the 5 incomplete models were soon sent into storage, leaving only one of the leader class to exist until 1951. Around the same time, the incomplete models were soon sent to Crovan's Gate Works around the Northwestern region of British Railways to be converted into diesel-powered via using an English Electric 16 SVT Mark I. After their assembly at the Crovan's Gate Works, they were sent on trials around the island before entering into service in 1953. They essentially became a part of British Railways' early diesels, like the LMS 1000 and their very own FEL class diesel mechanical locomotives. These gained the nickname of Sudrian Leaders, as they were basically diesel-electric locomotive versions of the steam-powered Southern Railway Leaders, and they were quite successful too, even getting the classification of a Type 3 before their withdrawal sometime during the late 1960s. They were painted gray around their trials, similar to that of the Leader, for being painted in the Brunswick green with lining on their sides when they entered service around 1953 with the Northwestern region. Eventually, around the late 50s and early 60s, the diesels were given the classification of D16/3, and they were primarily used on express passenger trains and goods trains around the main lines of the island of Sodor. The diesels would prevail on for another decade until at least the late 1960s, when the first one was withdrawn sometime during 1967, and the last of these Sudrian Leaders would be withdrawn in 1968. None of them survived into preservation, as all of them would be cut up by 1969. However, the infamous modernization plan of British Railways did eventually replace steam with diesels, and as of today, a model replica of the Sudrian Leader class is now on display at a transportation museum in Bickerstown, and it still stands as one of many memories of one of British Railways' earliest diesels of the 1950s. Well, I guess that's it, Man, this is a long one. So yeah, that's the end of this thing that is a sequel to this thing and basically everything else within this series. Now, I I was originally meant to do this and upload this on the 17th, aka St. Patrick's Day, but well, production was slow, and I had to finish this until the beginning of spring break, which obviously doesn't count it, but it's better than really seeing it on the 17th. Well, dealing with other things that you're probably gonna need to do, like school and whatnot. Yeah. But I promise you that the next one will be released on the 80th anniversary of the Railway series, and or sometime after Memorial Day, if I couldn't get the chance. Oh, and next month is my birthday, so I wanted to do something special on this channel to celebrate that moment. Anyway, yeah, I guess that's it for this. I gotta go now. So yeah, see ya.